In the dusty frontier town of Silverado, Texas, 1876, where justice was often as swift as it was brutal, 23-year-old Mary Catherine O'Brien sat in a cramped jail cell counting down the final hours of her life. Condemned to hang at sunrise for a murder she didn't commit, Mary had run out of appeals, run out of hope, and run out of people who believed in her innocence. The evidence against her was circumstantial but damning, and in a town where being Irish, Catholic and poor made you guilty until proven otherwise, Mary's fate had been sealed the moment they found her employer's body in his study. 3 miles outside town, 40-year-old Noah Bennett worked his cattle ranch in solitude, having sworn off human companionship after losing his wife and children to cholera 5 years earlier. A man of few words but strong convictions, Noah had built a reputation as someone who minded his own business and expected others to do the same. But when word reached him about the young Irish woman scheduled to hang for a crime that didn't match her character, something stirred in his chest that he thought had died with his family. Noah had seen Mary O'Brien exactly once, working as a housekeeper for the wealthy banker who was later found murdered. In that brief encounter, he had noticed her gentle manner with the banker's children and the quiet dignity with which she carried herself, despite obvious hardship. It didn't match the picture of a cold-blooded killer that the prosecution had painted, and Noah Bennett was a man who trusted his instincts more than popular opinion. What happened next would shock the entire territory and prove that sometimes love strikes like lightning, and sometimes a single act of faith can save not just one life, but 2 souls who thought they were beyond redemption. If you believe that true love can appear in the darkest moments and that one person's courage can change everything, hit that like button. Share your thoughts about standing up for what's right, even when you're standing alone, and subscribe for more stories that prove heroes come in unexpected forms. The pre-dawn darkness of Silverado's main street was broken only by flickering torches surrounding the gallows, their orange light casting dancing shadows on early arriving spectators. Mary Catherine O'Brien sat on her narrow cot, rosary beads moving through her fingers as she whispered prayers in English and Irish Gaelic. Sheriff Tom Bradley sat at his desk outside her cell, his weathered face showing none of the satisfaction that usually accompanied a successful murder case. In 20 years of law enforcement, Bradley had developed an instinct for guilt and innocence that rarely failed him, and something about this case had bothered him from the beginning. "You sure you don't want to tell me what really happened that night, Miss O'Brien?" Bradley asked quietly. Mary looked up from her prayers, her green eyes holding impossible peace for someone facing death in less than 3 hours. "Sheriff Bradley, I've told you the truth every day since you arrested me. I went to Mr. Caldwell's house to collect my wages before returning to Ireland. I found him dead in his study, and I was so frightened that I ran." Bradley had heard this story dozens of times, each telling identical and delivered with quiet conviction that made him believe her, despite evidence suggesting otherwise. The problem was that Mary had no alibi, no witnesses, and no family willing to vouch for her character. The sound of approaching hoofbeats interrupted their conversation. Noah Bennett, the rancher who lived outside town and rarely involved himself in community affairs, tied his horse to the hitching post and walked toward the jail with purposeful stride. "Morning, Noah," Bradley said. "Didn't expect to see you in town this early." Noah Bennett was a tall man with prematurely grey hair and weathered hands that spoke of years working cattle. When he spoke, his voice was calm but carried absolute determination. "Sheriff, I'm here about Miss O'Brien," Noah said, his gaze moving to where Mary sat in surprise, recognizing him from their brief encounter at the Caldwell house months earlier. "Noah, you know I can't discuss case details." "I'm not here to discuss the case," Noah interrupted gently but firmly. "I'm here to invoke Territorial Statute 247. Bradley frowned. "What kind of law?" Noah produced a folded document. According to Territorial Statute 247, a condemned woman can escape execution if a respectable man agrees to marry her and take responsibility for her future conduct. The silence was absolute. Mary's rosary stopped moving, and Bradley stared at the document. "Noah, this law is from the 1850s, Bradley said slowly. "I'm not even sure it's still—" "I checked with the Territorial Courthouse in Austin," Noah said calmly. "The law has never been repealed. It was designed to provide an alternative to execution for women who might be redeemed through marriage." Bradley looked from Noah to Mary. "Are you saying you want to marry Miss O'Brien to save her from hanging?" "That's exactly what I'm saying," Noah replied. "I believe she's innocent, and I'm willing to take responsibility for her as my wife under territorial law." Mary found her voice as barely more than a whisper. "Mr. Bennett, you don't even know me. Why would you risk your reputation for a stranger?" Noah turned to face her directly, and Mary saw something in his eyes she couldn't identify, not pity, not charity, but recognition that suggested he saw something others had missed. "Miss O'Brien, I may not know your history, but I know your character," Noah said quietly. "I saw how you treated the Caldwell children with kindness when you thought no one was watching. I've seen enough guilty people to know that you're not one of them." "But marriage," Mary began, "would be real and legal in every sense," Noah said firmly. "I'm not proposing a marriage of convenience. If you agree, you become my wife, with all rights and responsibilities that entails. I own a successful ranch I can provide for you, and I give you my word that you'd be treated with respect." Sheriff Bradley was still staring at the legal document. "Noah, even if this law is valid, Judge Morrison would have to approve it, and he's not exactly known for being flexible." "Then we'd better go wake him up," Noah said, checking his pocket watch. "We've got less than 2 hours before sunrise." Mary felt tears gathering as the full impact of what Noah was offering began to register. A complete stranger was willing to marry her, to bind his life to hers permanently, based on nothing more than his belief in her innocence. "Mr. Bennett," she said, her voice growing stronger, "if you're truly willing to do this, if you believe God has brought you here for this purpose, then yes, I accept your proposal." Noah nodded once, satisfied. "Sheriff, I believe we have a wedding to arrange before sunrise." As they prepared to leave the jail and confront Judge Morrison with the most unusual legal petition in the territory is history, Mary felt something she hadn't experienced since her arrest. Hope. Not just for her life, but for the possibility that in her darkest hour, God had sent her not just salvation, but perhaps something even more precious. A chance at love she had always dreamed of, but never dared to expect. Judge Harrison Morrison's house stood like a fortress on Silverado's most prestigious street. At barely past 4 in the morning, the house was dark except for the single lamp that flickered to life in response to Sheriff Bradley's insistent knocking. "This better be an emergency, Bradley," Judge Morrison grumbled as he opened the door in his nightgown. "The execution isn't scheduled for another hour and a half." "Your Honor, we have an unusual situation," Bradley said, gesturing toward Noah and Mary. "Mr. Bennett is invoking Territorial Statute 247 to prevent Miss O'Brien's execution through marriage." Morrison's expression shifted from irritation to disbelief to outrage. "Marriage? Are you telling me this man wants to marry a convicted murderess to circumvent justice? I'm telling you, I want to marry an innocent woman who's been wrongly convicted," Noah said calmly, stepping forward with the legal document. "And according to territorial law, that's my right as a citizen of good standing." Morrison snatched the document and examined it by lamplight, his frown deepening as he read the archaic legal language that clearly supported Noah's position. "This law is antiquated, Mr. Bennett. It dates from a time when the territory had very different needs." "But it's still valid law," Noah replied steadily. unless you can show me where it's been repealed." Morrison invited them into his study, lighting additional lamps before settling into his chair with the air of a man preparing to deliver a difficult verdict. "Mr. Bennett," the judge began, "I've known you for 5 years. You're a respected member of this community, a successful rancher, and a man of good character. That's precisely why I'm having difficulty understanding why you would risk your reputation to save a woman lawfully convicted of murder." Noah had expected this question. "Your Honor, I believe justice should be based on truth, not convenience. I don't believe Miss O'Brien committed this crime, and I'm not willing to watch an innocent woman die, because it's easier than admitting we might have made a mistake." "The evidence against her is substantial," Morrison replied. "She was found with the victim's money, she had opportunity and motive, and a witness placed her at the scene." "Circumstantial evidence," Noah countered. "Evidence that could just as easily support her claim that she was collecting wages owed to her." Morrison turned to Mary. "Miss O'Brien, do you understand what Mr. Bennett is proposing? Marriage would make you his legal responsibility. Your debts would become his debts. Your actions would reflect on his reputation." Mary found her voice, speaking with quiet dignity. "Your Honor, I understand the gravity of what Mr. Bennett is offering, and I don't take it lightly. I have nothing to offer except my word that I'm innocent and my promise that I would be a faithful and grateful wife." "Gratitude is not the foundation for successful marriage," Morrison observed. "What happens when the novelty wears off and Mr. Bennett realizes he's bound to a woman he barely knows?" It was Noah who answered, his voice carrying conviction that surprised everyone. "Your Honor, I'm not a young man acting on impulse. I'm 40 years old, I've been married before, and I understand what commitment means. I wouldn't be here if I wasn't prepared to honor my vows for life." Morrison leaned back, clearly struggling with the unprecedented situation. "There are practical considerations. The law requires the ceremony be performed before the scheduled execution. We have less than an hour, and I would need witnesses, proper documentation." "I can serve as a witness," Sheriff Bradley offered, "and my deputy could serve as a second witness." "The ceremony would have to be performed in the jail," Morrison continued, "as I'm not willing to delay execution proceedings unless I'm certain all legal requirements are met." "Your Honor," Noah said, "if you're willing to perform the ceremony, I believe we can meet all requirements within the time available. The question is whether you're prepared to honor a territorial law you may personally disagree with." Morrison stared at Noah, recognizing the challenge implicit in his words. As a judge, Morrison prided himself on applying law fairly regardless of personal opinions. "Very well," Morrison said finally, rising with obvious reluctance. "I'll perform the ceremony, but I want it understood that this marriage will be legally binding in every sense. If you're having second thoughts, Mr. Bennett, now is the time." "No second thoughts, Your Honor," Noah replied firmly. "I'm ready to take Miss O'Brien as my wife." As they prepared to return to the jail for the most unusual wedding in Silverado's history, Mary found herself studying the man about to become her husband. Noah Bennett was risking everything, his reputation, his standing, his comfortable life, to save a woman he barely knew. But as they stepped into the pre-dawn darkness, with the gallows visible in the distance, and the first hints of sunrise beginning to lighten the eastern sky, Mary realized that fear was a luxury she couldn't afford. In less than an hour, she would either be dead or married to a stranger who believed in her innocence enough to bet his entire future on it. Either way, her life as Mary Catherine O'Brien was about to end forever. The jail cell that had been Mary's prison was transformed into the most unlikely wedding chapel in Texas history as Judge Morrison, Sheriff Bradley, and Deputy Wilson gathered around a makeshift altar created from Bradley's desk. Outside, the gallows stood ready, and a small crowd was beginning to gather, unaware that the execution they'd come to witness was about to be replaced by something extraordinary. Mary stood beside Noah in the cramped space, acutely aware she was about to marry a man whose full name she didn't even know, wearing the same grey dress she'd been arrested in. There had been no time for preparations, but Noah seemed utterly unconcerned with such details. "Before we begin," Judge Morrison said, consulting his pocket watch with anxiety, "I want to make certain both parties understand the irrevocable nature of what we're about to do. Mr. Bennett, you're taking legal and financial responsibility for Miss O'Brien. Miss O'Brien, you're agreeing to be bound by matrimony to a man you barely know. Are you both certain?" "We're certain, Your Honor," Noah replied, speaking for both of them with quiet confidence. Morrison opened his prayer book and began the familiar words, but the traditional phrases took on surreal weight when spoken in a jail cell with Gallows visible through the window. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here in the sight of God to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." Mary found herself studying Noah's face as Morrison spoke, searching for signs of doubt or regret. Instead, she saw calm determination and something else that made her breath catch. When he looked at her, there was genuine warmth in his eyes, as if he saw not a convicted murderer, but a woman worthy of respect and protection. "Do you, Noah Samuel Bennett, take Mary Catherine O'Brien to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, until death do you part?" "I do," Noah said firmly. "Do you, Mary Catherine O'Brien, take Noah Samuel Bennett to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, until death do you part?" Mary's voice came out as barely more than a whisper, but her words were clear. "I do." The lack of wedding rings created a momentary pause, until Noah reached into his vest pocket and produced a simple gold band that Mary recognized with surprise. It was his first wife's wedding ring. "This belonged to my late wife, Sarah," Noah said quietly. "She would have wanted it to protect another woman who needed shelter from life's storms." Mary felt tears gathering as Noah slipped the ring onto her finger. The gesture was both practical and deeply symbolic. He was offering her not just his name and protection, but a place in the life he had built and the love he had known. "By the power vested in me by the territory of Texas," Judge Morrison declared, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Mr. Bennett, you may kiss your bride." The kiss that sealed their union was gentle and brief, more a promise than passion, but it carried weight that surprised them both. In that moment, Mary ceased to be a condemned prisoner and became Mrs. Noah Bennett, with all the rights and protections that name provided. Sheriff Bradley immediately began preparing legal documents to record the marriage and cancel the execution order, but his work was interrupted by angry voices from the town square. Word had spread, and several townspeople were demanding to know why the execution was being delayed. "Judge Morrison," called Thomas Whitfield, the bank president, "what's the meaning of this delay? Justice demands that this woman pay for her crimes." Morrison stepped outside to address the growing crowd. "Citizens of Silverado, I want to inform you that Miss O'Brien has been legally married to Mr. Noah Bennett under Territorial Statute 247, which provides for commutation of a death sentence through marriage to a responsible citizen." The reaction was immediate and explosive. Shouts of outrage mingled with demands for explanation as the crowd struggled to understand how their anticipated execution had suddenly been transformed into a wedding. "This is a mockery of justice," Whitfield continued, his face red with anger. "Harrison Caldwell deserves better than to have his murderer escape through some legal technicality." Noah stepped forward, positioning himself protectively in front of Mary. "Mr. Whitfield, I understand your anger, but I believe you're directing it at the wrong person. My wife is innocent of the charges against her, and I'm willing to stake my reputation on that belief." "Your wife?" Whitfield spat. "You've married a convicted killer based on what? Your feelings?" "Based on my judgment," Noah replied calmly, "and based on my conviction that sometimes the courage to do what's right matters more than the comfort of following popular opinion." The crowd's hostility was palpable, and Mary realized that her salvation had come at enormous cost to Noah's standing in the community. By marrying her, he had made himself a target for everyone's frustration about Caldwell's unsolved murder. As the crowd gradually dispersed, still grumbling about the unexpected turn of events, Noah helped Mary into his wagon for the journey to his ranch. She was free for the first time in 2 months, but freedom came with its own uncertainties. "Mrs. Bennett," Noah said as they drove away from the town that had been prepared to hang her, "I want you to know that I don't expect anything from you except honesty. We'll figure out the rest as we go along." Mary looked back at the gallows that had been intended for her, then forward at the vast Texas landscape that was now her new home. "Noah, I don't know how to thank you for what you've done. You've given me not just my life, but a chance to prove my innocence. We've given each other a chance," Noah corrected gently. "And I have a feeling that's going to turn out to be more valuable than either of us imagined." As their wagon rolled toward the ranch that was now Mary's home, the sun climbed higher in the Texas sky, illuminating a future that neither could have predicted, but both were ready to face together. 6 months after the most unconventional wedding in Silverado's history, Mary Bennett stood on the porch of the ranch house she now called home, watching her husband work with cattle in the distance. The transformation in her life still seemed miraculous. From a condemned prisoner counting down final hours to a ranch wife building a future with a man who had seen her worth when the entire world had written her off as guilty. Their marriage had evolved into something neither had anticipated. What began as a legal arrangement to save Mary's life had slowly blossomed into genuine partnership and, surprisingly, the beginnings of real love. Noah was patient, kind, and respectful of the boundaries Mary needed as she adjusted to her new life, while Mary brought warmth and purpose back to a house that had been too quiet for too long. The biggest transformation had come 3 weeks earlier, with unexpected news that changed everything for Silverado. A drifter named Jake Morrison had been arrested in El Paso for robbery and murder, and under pressure from authorities, he had confessed to killing Harrison Caldwell during a botched burglary. The confession included details only the real killer could have known, officially exonerating Mary and proving what Noah had believed from the beginning. Sheriff Bradley had ridden out personally to deliver the news, his weathered face showing relief and embarrassment as he explained the developments. "Mrs. Bennett," Bradley had said, using her married name with obvious respect, "I want you to know that a formal apology will be issued by the court, and there's talk of compensation for what you endured. Morrison's confession clears you completely." Mary had received the news with quiet dignity, feeling vindicated but also aware that damage to her reputation would take longer to repair than her legal status. Some people would always wonder, and others would never forgive Noah for his dramatic intervention that had embarrassed the entire community. But Noah seemed unconcerned with public opinion, focusing instead on building their life together and expanding the ranch operations. He had been discussing the possibility of starting a horse breeding program, and Mary had surprised him with her knowledge of animal husbandry learned during her childhood in Ireland. The town's attitude toward them had gradually shifted from hostility to cautious acceptance, helped by Dr. Williams's vocal support and the undeniable fact that Noah and Mary were proving to be valuable community members. Mary had begun volunteering at the town's small school, teaching Irish songs and stories to children fascinated by her accent and dramatic personal history. On this particular morning, as Mary watched Noah work with new horses they had purchased from an Austin breeder, She was interrupted by the sound of approaching riders. Sheriff Bradley and Judge Morrison were riding toward the ranch house, their expressions serious but not hostile. "Mrs. Bennett," Judge Morrison said as he dismounted, "we've come to discuss a matter we believe you and your husband should know about." After Noah joined them, Sheriff Bradley explained that Morrison had confessed to more than just Caldwell's murder. He's been responsible for a string of robberies and murders throughout Texas, including cases where innocent people were arrested based on circumstantial evidence. Judge Morrison looked uncomfortable as he continued. "Mrs. Bennett, your case has prompted a review of several recent convictions in our jurisdiction. We've discovered at least 3 other instances where evidence was questionable and the real perpetrator may have been Morrison or his associates." Mary felt a chill as she realized the implications. "You're saying other innocent people may have been executed based on the same kind of evidence that nearly killed me?" "That's exactly what we're saying," Morrison replied heavily. "And we wanted you to know that your case and your husband's intervention has led to reforms in how we handle capital cases. We're implementing new requirements for evidence and witness testimony and establishing a formal appeal process." After the officials left, Mary and Noah sat together on their porch, watching the sun set over the vast Texas landscape that had become their shared horizon. "Do you ever regret it?" Mary asked, a question that had been building for weeks. "Marrying a stranger to save her life? Risking everything you had built?" Noah was quiet for a long moment, considering his answer with careful thought. "Mary, I've learned that the biggest regrets in life usually come from chances we don't take, not the ones we do. Marrying you wasn't just about saving your life. It was about saving mine, too." "Your life wasn't in danger," Mary said, confused. "Wasn't it?" Noah replied gently. "I was slowly dying of loneliness and bitterness, convinced that the best parts of my life were behind me. You reminded me that it's never too late to choose hope over fear, love over safety, action over resignation." Mary reached for his hand, still amazed by the simple miracle of being able to touch him freely, to claim her place beside him without shame or fear. "I love you, Noah Bennett," she said, the words coming easily now after months of growing certainty. "I love you too, Mary Bennett," he replied, bringing her hand to his lips for a gentle kiss. "And I'm grateful every day that God gave me the courage to speak up when it mattered most." As the stars appeared in the vast Texas sky, Mary reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them together. She had been saved from the gallows by a stranger's faith in her innocence, but more than that, she had been saved from a life of loneliness by a man who had seen her worth when she couldn't see it herself. Their love story had become legend throughout Texas, the tale of the rancher who married a condemned woman to save her life, and discovered that sometimes the greatest acts of courage are rewarded with the greatest gifts of the heart. And every morning when Mary woke up in the home they had built together, she knew that being called Noah Bennett's bride was infinitely better than any other fate she could have imagined. This incredible story proves that sometimes the darkest moments reveal the brightest heroes, and that true love can bloom even in the shadow of the gallows. Drop a comment below about someone who stood up for you when everyone else had given up, or a time when you found hope in the most impossible circumstances. Hit that like button if this reminded you that one person's courage can change everything and that love really can conquer injustice. Subscribe for more amazing stories that show how ordinary people become heroes when they choose to do what's right instead of what's easy. Share this with someone who needs to remember that it's never too late for a miracle, and that sometimes our salvation comes from the most unexpected places.